Hi MEYLE friends, today we're going to show you how to change the transmission fluid on a 5-speed automatic from Mercedes. For that I've brought my colleague Sasha along again, because who knows more about this than he does? And Sasha, the transmission?
722.6, a very common transmission from Mercedes, as Misha already mentioned, a 5-speed torque converter automatic. Today we don't just want to do a regular oil change, but we also plan to...
Exactly, we're going to replace the mechatronic plate, which often causes problems. The vehicle goes into limp mode. That can be stressful. You can get up to 60 and then nothing happens anymore. And replacing it isn't actually that hard. You just have to unscrew the mechatronic block for that.
That's what we're planning to do today, because on this control electronics board there are several components, from valves to speed sensors, which can also cause faults. And yeah, let's show you. Let's head over there to see what the whole thing looks like. Here you can see all the components needed to carry out the repair. Of course, we need the right tools. And Misha, you already picked something up there. Tell us about it.
The oil dipstick, it's important too. It's not included with the vehicle. You actually have to own it separately. There are two markings on the scale, one at 80 degrees, which is basically the operating temperature, and one at 25 degrees, which is for what's called the cold fill. But we'll go into that in detail later when we fill the transmission.
Then, included in our kit, of course, is the control electronics, which, as Misha already mentioned, sits on top of the valve body. And if we take a quick look at it here, for example, here we have the speed sensors, here is the oil level sensor, the float, exactly. But we'll give you more detailed information about that later when we assemble everything.
The connector is, of course, also included. This connector also causes major problems with the vehicle. What is this here, Sasha?
It happens that, over time, these O-rings wear out. And then it can happen that oil is drawn up through the wiring harness to the control unit by capillary action. And that can lead to a complete failure. And that's why it's very important not only to replace the O-rings, but ideally the entire connector housing as well.
Exactly, don't try to save money here, because, as Sasha already mentioned, the control unit can almost fill up halfway with oil. It's hard to imagine when you take it out what's actually up there behind the firewall.
Drawn up.
It shakes, really. It's just like a cocktail shaker. Unbelievable.
Exactly. And of course, the usual materials for the oil change. A new filter, an oil pan gasket, and all the necessary mounting hardware. Also very important here, a new magnet. And you can't do it without it.
Of course, the correct ATF, the right transmission oil. Exactly. The ATF 3H+. In the correct specification.
But now, in the kit, there's also this little locking pin included.
The seal.
The seal, we definitely have to replace that. Why?
It's an indicator of whether someone has already worked on the vehicle, or if someone has tampered with the fluid level. And every time you remove this seal, or if you want to loosen this cap, you have to break out this little plate here.
Exactly. Of course, our kit includes a new one, so you can properly secure everything again at the end. First, while the vehicle is still on the ground, we can start by removing the filler neck. And also, where the oil check will take place later, remove it. For that, I would recommend you to remove the intake hose here, because that will make your work a bit easier later on when you're working with the filling device. Now we'll remove the locking pin here. And as you can see, it breaks now. But then you can pull off the filler cap. Very important here. Always check if the sealing ring is in place. It could be that it gets lost or is still stuck in here somehow. Stuck. That's why you should take a quick look to see if it came off as well. After you've lifted the vehicle, you can first remove the soundproofing cover. In our case, it's already been removed or dismantled. Then, as usual, here you can see the drain plug of the oil pan. You can now loosen it, and then the oil can be drained first. Once most of the oil has drained out, you can reinstall the drain plug. Of course, use a new sealing ring and then tighten it to the specified torque. And we tighten it to the specified torque of 20 Newton meters. The next step would be to remove the oil pan. So after we've removed all the bolts from the transmission oil pan, be careful when you lower the whole thing, because there will still be a bit of residual oil inside. And that's what we're going to do now. We are going to empty it out completely. And as you can see here we have our mechatronics unit, and here is our filter. And now, this is very important. Some transmissions are equipped with an additional drain plug on the torque converter. You can see that here, when you remove this cover, you need to check by turning the crankshaft pulley at the front to see if you have a drain plug. If you don't have one, or if none is present, still be careful when turning the torque converter. Since we have a mechanical pump here that is driven by the converter, it can happen that additional oil comes out. That's why, when turning it, just leave the drain pan in place here. And yes, otherwise we can now remove the filter. The filter is only plugged in up here. Then we can take a closer look at it here. As you can see, quite a few deposits have already accumulated here. That's why it's a good thing we're doing the oil change today, Misha. Because as we said, the oil quality still looked very good, but as you can see, there is wear, it accumulates, so it was about time. So now we'll remove the plug, and then we'll do that. Remove the plug housing. And here for you. The whole thing is locked up here in a kind of safety catch. The whole thing needs to be turned downward. And then you'll see the plug moves backward, and then, with a bit of finesse, slowly pull the plug out to the back. Then you can store it up here for now. And now the plug housing still needs to be removed. Inside there is a hex bolt. You can use a 7mm socket for it. It's best to get yourself a small ratchet with a short extension. You have to feel around a bit, there it is already and done. Also very important, the screw only gets 2.5 Newton meters of torque. So later on, when you reassemble everything, don't tighten it by hand, because it will immediately strip. You can damage the thread. That's why it's very important to use a torque wrench during reassembly as well. And again here, carefully remove the plug housing. And now, it's very important. As you can see here, there are usually O-rings on it, but right now they're missing. So check whether the old O-rings are still stuck in the transmission housing, and if so, remove them. And that's what we're going to do now. Here we already have one of them. Let's see where the other one is. There's the second one. It's very important not to forget these so you don't end up with leaks during reassembly. Alright, now we can remove the mechatronics unit. It also sounds harder than it actually is. There are 10 torque screws, size 30 torques. You've got 5 on this side. And 4 on this side. Loosen all of them. They're tightened to 8 Newton meters, so they shouldn't be too tight when you undo them. Unscrew them all. Here's a little tip. Don't stress too much about where to set them aside. It's important, of course, but all the screws are the same length. Another tip from me, when working on the transmission, the top priority is cleanliness. Make sure you're wearing clean gloves and that there's not too much dust around you. And later on, when you set the mechatronics unit down with the electronic control unit, make sure you have a clean surface. Don't use any linty rags on it. Really ensure and make sure that no foreign particles get in there, because that can seriously affect the system later on. Here's another tip. It's best to have a second person available to help you. Thanks, Misha, for being here today and helping me out. Can you come over and hold this for a moment? Now we'll go ahead and loosen the last screw here.
This part is a bit tricky here because really, and here another sensor keeps coming out as well.
Careful, I've got it.
You can see it clearly. Well,
there we go. Now you can see the electronic control unit. And with that, let's head over to the workbench. So now we've removed the mechatronics module and set it here, and replacing the entire circuit board is actually no problem at all. I'd like to briefly explain again what components we have installed here. The electronic control unit consists of 6 solenoid valves, a speed sensor, and down here we can see the float for the oil level. Up front here we have the switch for the parking lock, and here we can see the oil temperature sensor. If, for example, you had problems with the transmission and got an error code, inconsistent input speed, take a look at the speed sensor because it often gives you a clue as to whether there might be internal damage, for example. That's because metal shavings tend to collect on top of the sensor, or in the worst case, the sensor itself is even damaged. Otherwise, we'll now remove the circuit board. To do this, we loosen the 3 retaining clips from the valves. And make sure to lay everything out exactly as you take it apart. Here's a little side note for you. A common problem with this transmission is the torque converter lockup clutch, which doesn't open and close properly. This can lead to sudden changes in RPM or even significant pressure surges in the system. This solenoid valve is primarily responsible for controlling or directing the pressure there, and it can sometimes become damaged or fail to function properly. All of the valves are available individually and can also be replaced separately. So if you have a problem there, here's a little tip. Try replacing the valve for the torque converter lockup clutch. That should actually fix the issue. It should. Now we're going to carefully remove all of the valves one by one. Please handle them very carefully. And as you can see here, some of them have O-rings for sealing. These are also included in our kit and must be replaced. 2 solenoid valves installed here do not have O-rings. These seals function solely via the surface of the valve and the surface of the valve body, utilizing the tolerance between them. Once again, lay everything out exactly as you removed it, making sure to keep all parts organized. Here we have one. There are no O-rings. It seals purely via the surface. On this valve, there are 2 small screens inside for the control pressure and the shift pressure. Here as well, check whether they are still properly in position or if there are any dirt particles inside. Because in the worst case, you might already notice if we have a lot of deposits, for example here on the valve body, these are often contaminants that you can't remove even with a flush. In most cases, the only solution is to completely disassemble the valve body or the mechatronics and clean everything thoroughly. Otherwise, we've now carefully removed all the valves, and now the electronic control unit is just securely clipped on top. And now we'll take that off. So now we have the whole thing underneath. Now we can already start installing the new circuit board. Now we've put the electronic control back on and can already carefully install the pressure control valve. So the valves that we are specifically talking about don't have O-rings can be reinstalled. Here you can see the O-rings that are being replaced. You'll notice this one here. This one is a bit larger than the other 3. The O-ring sets here are for the solenoid valves, which are responsible for shifting from first to second, third to fourth gear. And the larger O-ring is for the solenoid valve of the torque converter lockup clutch. It's very important. It's hardly noticeable visually, so you have to look a bit more closely, so you don't mix them up. All the O-rings have been replaced and our solenoid valves are back in position. Now the brackets can be reattached. To do this, simply place the whole thing back on top here. They get tightened to 8 Newton meters. Now we still need to tighten everything to the specified torque. And Misha, I'd like to ask you to help me by holding the module in place. The mechatronic unit is now complete. But since we're already at the workbench, we can go ahead and prepare the oil pan in one step. And I've already set it out here. Of course, it's very important that the gasket is replaced. But if you take a look at the old magnet, you'll notice that there are already some pretty heavy deposits built up on it. This is especially important for us here. The kit includes a new magnet, so we can set the old one aside for now, remove the gasket, and then thoroughly clean the oil pan. With a rag and brake cleaner, clean it properly. I'll do that now. So, our oil pan is prepared, and now we'll reassemble everything in reverse order. Starting with our mechatronic unit. I'll get Micha to help me again in a moment, because the module is a bit heavy, and it's much easier to install it with 2 people. Micha will be here in a moment with the mechatronic unit and will help us with it. But before that, I want to quickly show you something down here inside the transmission housing. Here are the 2 recesses where the speed sensors will later be installed and receive their signal from the front planetary gear set. Back here, we have the opening. Later on, when the oil level rises, this will be sealed by the transmission oil level float so that the oil doesn't get up into the gears, which would cause the oil to foam and result in air pockets forming in the oil. It's very important that when you reinstall the mechatronics, you check here. This is where we have the lever for the range selector. Make sure that the shift slide goes exactly back into this position. Otherwise, you won't be able to properly fit the module. Now, we'll tighten everything to the specified torque. Again, 8 Newton meters here. As the next step, we can reinstall the connector. Make sure that the connector seat is absolutely and completely clean and that there are no deposits. Present? Now, fit the inner nut again using a 7mm socket and tighten it to 2.5 Newton meters. After that, we can put the connector back on. Again, do this with the utmost care and screw the connector in using the mechanism. Screw it in. Then we'll clean the sealing surface of the oil pan. Now we'll insert the new filter. And then afterwards, we can fit our oil pan with the new magnet and new gasket. Now tighten all the oil pan bolts from the center outwards. Tighten them in a crisscross pattern to 8 Newton meters. We're now done under the vehicle for the time being. So now we can start with the filling process. To do this, first pour 5 liters into the transmission fill port at the top. So first I'll prime our oil filling device. In our case, we're now using our oil filling device. With this transmission, if you don't have one, it's not a big deal. Since everything is filled from the top, you can usually manage it with a funnel as well. After we filled in the oil, we can go ahead and reassemble everything at the front. There wasn't much we had to take apart anyway. That means putting the intake hose back on and tightening everything up again. After that, we'll start the vehicle. Misha is already sitting in the car and will shift through all the gears for you.
Now we're starting the vehicle. As mentioned, 25 degrees. Of course, it hasn't reached that yet. It's still completely cold. Is it in park? And now we'll shift through all the gears, holding each for about 3 seconds. Neutral, D. Neutral. Reverse, it's complaining. My rear parktronic is too close. We're right up against the loading wall. So that's, the engine can keep running now, which means we'll bring it up to operating temperature. We can just now take a look at the oil level. We'll do that with the operating level. Okay, I'm back from the test drive. The vehicle is now at operating temperature. That means the engine oil is definitely ready, but the transmission still needs a bit longer. The oil needs to be over 80 degrees, and you really need a thorough test drive to reach 80 degrees. Yes, and now it's time to check the fluid level.
That's right, we have to manually check the fluid level again, because the oil naturally expands at higher temperatures. For that, we have this dipstick, and now we'll insert it into the fill opening where we just added the oil. Here's a little tip, push the stick in all the way. It doesn't go in completely, but it goes in almost all the way to the bottom. You'll feel a certain resistance. Then we pull the whole thing out. And as we can see, this is the area where the level should be. At 80 degrees, that's where we are.
Perfect.
The oil level is correct.
The oil level is correct. My vehicle has now been serviced again. Thank you very much, Sasha, for the professional care of my car.
No problem. Now, one last important thing. Read out the error memory, check if there are any error codes, delete them if necessary, and of course, secure everything with a new personal identification number, PIN. Carefully insert the whole thing here, check if the seal is seated correctly, and close everything up. And that's it.
See you next time.